God. Okay, it's great to see all of you once again for another wonderful Tanya Tuesday. And if you've slacked off a little bit or haven't been too involved, then uh, today we are going to start a new topic, and so you could jump right in to this new topic. Though all topics are connected, it's always good when we have a new section that gives us a little bit of reset and a little bit of area to jump in. So this is the most one of the most famous chapters of the Tanya, because the Rebbe said that every single day we should be saying the beginning of this chapter before our prayers in the morning, and so that's what makes it a very, 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 very famous chapter, and we're going to see why. So let us first recap what we just did in the previous chapters of the Tanya. Last, or maybe we could go on a whole, a whole Tanya overview, what we've done in all 40 chapters, all 40 chapters till now. So the beginning of the Tanya starts with a couple questions, and then it sets the stage to really take us through who we are. And that's really the beginning of the Tanya. The beginning of the Tanya, starting from chapter 1 already, gives us idea we have two souls. It gives us this idea that we have each soul has it has the 10 powers of the soul, which is three intellectual and seven emotional. And then we speak about the garments of the soul, and both the godly soul and the animal soul have this entire makeup, and that's basically the war that goes on in our bodies. The godly soul wants to utilize its 10 powers of its soul through the garments to do good things and think good things, and the animal soul wants to take control with its 10 powers of its soul and think not good things or selfish things and do not good things or selfish things. Right? So that was the battle. And we described that most of us only have the power and ability to control our, most of us only have the power and ability to control our actions. However, our to completely get rid of our animal soul, that is only for somebody who's righteous, and that is why even as we progress in our spirituality, we might always have thoughts of doing wrong things, and that's only natural because we don't get rid of our evil inclination. The judge and the test of life is not whether we get thoughts to do the wrong thing, but whether we indulge in those thoughts. Okay. Then we discussed uh, so how do we make sure we do the right thing? So we said the longer version, the best way is to meditate about God. When we meditate about God, it creates love and fear in our hearts, and that will automatically make it easier to serve God. Okay, so the love and the fear that was mentioned in the beginning of Tanya was really a key to be able to allow our godly soul to win the war. Then it said, well, that's the ideal form of love that we create through our meditation. However, there is another form of love that we can create, another form of love and awe of God that we can create. That is through a more simple tapping into our natural love and awe of God. Since we have a godly soul, by virtue of the godly soul, there is a love and awe of God that we can tap into, and it is easier to tap into that. And so he gave us different ways of getting into that in chapters 18, 19, and then 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Okay, then in 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, he discussed what if we have negative emotions that are holding us back? What if we have depression? What if your mind wanders? What if we have spiritual insensitivity? That was the discussion there. So it's kind of like troubleshooting. It was the troubleshooting section. Okay. Then we went into from chapters 31 through 34. He went through after we have depression, how to get to joy and the power of joy and why joy is so important in serving God. Okay, so it's not necessarily about love and awe, but it's about being joyous throughout serving God. All right, then in chapters 35, 36, 37, we spoke about the power of action. Okay, so again, till now we just described there's a war. Okay, there's a war going on, and each one wants control. But now we're getting more nitty gritty. How do I serve God in my day-to-day life? Because that's really the guidebook. What does it mean to even serve God? And so that's where he's getting to chapters 35, 36, 37. He's describing, well, we serve God through action. Why through action? Because God has a desire to have a home here on this earth. But then he continues in chapters 38, 39, 40. But you should know that action alone is not enough. And part and parcel of what God wants is kavanah. He wants the intention. The intention is what drives us to serve God, and that is the love of God and the awe of God, and that is because the mitzvahs are supposed to be connecting us to God, and therefore, in order for it to be a relationship, it has to be driven by a love and awe of God. However, throughout this entire description here, he has not described really at length at any point what this love and awe looks like, just the need for it, or the different ways to create it through meditation. But what does love actually look like? And that is going to be the following bunch of chapters. Chapter 41 through chapter 49 are all about love and awe and actually mercy. So we're going to discuss at length throughout these chapters. All right, so we know from reading the entire Tanya, we need to have kavanah. We know from the entire Tanya that love and awe is the key to unlock winning against the evil inclination. But what is considered love? What does love actually look like? And more detailed meditations on how to bring it about. That is all what we're going to do over here. And so this is our new section. This is what we're going to be discussing for the next while is different ways of looking at uh, love and reverence of God, its importance, and how one should go ahead and do it. Because as we know in our lives, that we have many different loves, and love can be expressed at many different levels, and that doesn't mean the other love is not a love, but there are definitely layers of love, and that's the question: what is demanded of us, and what should we be striving for, and why? So with that, actually, this chapter is going to start with awe, fear, reverence. Okay, now I've mentioned this many times, but I'll mention it again. The Tanya does not talk about fear of. Yes, David. Hit a question? No? Okay. The Tanya does not talk about fear of punishment, okay? Most people associate reverence or fear to be fearing God's retribution, okay? So it's very common. Places will talk about hell, and we'll talk about if you sin, all the punishments is going to befall you, and what will happen to your children, what will happen to your money, what will happen to this, what will happen to that. If you serve God through that type of fear and awe, though you may end up being very strictly religious, you are not serving God, you are serving yourself. Which is why the Tanya does not subscribe or discuss that type of discussion. The Tanya did discuss earlier in the Tanya about the punishments that happen or the cleansing process that happens after we sin, but it only brought it to bring out a point for us to understand and realize just how damaging sins are, that they require a cleansing process. But his point there wasn't to scare us into doing the right action. His point was just to describe to us what sins do, how they create a schism and a disconnection between us and God, and therefore it requires a lot of fixing up. Conversely, mitzvos connect us with God. So again, the Tanya does not focus at all on the fear of punishment. That's not considered serving God. Though one can become very religious that way, the purpose of the Tanya is to teach people not how to be religious, okay? The Tanya was written at the time, really, for many, many religious Jews, okay? It's written for how to help someone serve God. Okay, that's the point, how to serve Hashem. And to serve God is not to have a fear of punishment, but to have a awe and a reverence of God. So with that, we're going to delve into chapter 41, which is going to start with the awe and reverence of God. And I'm going to start with a question for you. So, what is, if you're looking at a Jewish man, what would be the most telltale sign that such a person is religious? Okay. Any guesses over here? What would be the most telltale sign that such a person is religious? Right?
They're
If you
wearing a kippah, tzitzits.
Very good, very good. Wearing a kippah and tzitzis, so yes, as well. Tzitzis can be covered by a jacket, but yes, wearing a kippah can be covered by a hat too. But yeah, the most telltale sign typically that someone is religious, not necessarily, by the way, but the most telltale sign that someone is religious is that they are wearing a kippah. Okay? Um, Why? Now, someone could do many, many of the mitzvahs without wearing the kippah. In fact, there are many, modern Orthodox people who keep many mitzvahs that don't wear the kippah. And my point is not to be judgmental of anybody who doesn't. This is all to bring in a point. Remember, the Tanya, we all study the Tanya, we all become better over time as we study the Tanya, and none of this is ever meant to be judgmental. It is all meant to help us grow. So I'm just putting that out of the way. Um, so the reason the kippah is there is it's a reminder of God above. Okay, it's a reminder that um, that God is above us. Now, why women don't wear it? The simple explanation. First of all, you won't find a kippah anywhere in the Torah. It originates in the Talmud, as far as we know. The discussion of the kippah doesn't mean people didn't wear it before, but the discussion of it, as far as I know, first appears in the Talmud. But the reason that generally men wear a kippah, women don't, is because we believe that women have a more natural um, spirituality. But putting that aside, because it's not really my point, the kippah is really a side point. Um, the kippah is a reminder that God is above us, and that is the most important element for a religious Jew. In other words, to be religious is not to have love of God, but actually to accept upon yourself that God is your king and he's always above you and watching you. That's really going to be the point of the Tanya here. Is that as beautiful as love of God is and as connecting as love is, the first step is you have to accept that God is king. And accepting God as king is more of a awe and reverence. Think of it in terms of a physical king, okay? One can love the king, but the first step in having a king is accepting that king with awe and reverence. So let's say we're talking about King David. Okay, let's talk about King David for a moment. So if we have King David, um, in order for us to, if you were to meet King David, of course, there's many reasons to love him, but the first feeling should be, he is my king. I have a reverence towards him. And just as an aside, pu- simply put also, love can wax and wane. Feelings of love towards God can come and go. We don't always necessarily feel a love towards God, but it's the acceptance of God as our King that makes us always do the right thing. Think of it in a marriage. Really, what happens in a marriage is a commitment. It's not a it's not a commitment to love, though one should have love in a marriage, otherwise it will eventually fall apart. But more important than the love is the commitment. Now, obviously, like I said, if you don't have love, eventually it will also fall apart. But the commitment is there even when there aren't feelings of love. At certain times, there can be commitment as well. Um, so now that we understand that, um, Now that we understand that the most important thing in serving God is acceptance of his kingship, acceptance that God is our king and we must listen to him. Okay, he is our king. We must listen to him. We must show him awe and reverence like subjects of a king. Okay, so the question is, how do I get there? How do I get to that feeling? Any thoughts? In other words, if I understand that the most important step in serving God is to accept him as the king. That's the baseline. Okay, that's the baseline. You cannot consider yourself a servant of God without at the very least accepting him as your king. How do we reach such a place? What if I'm not feeling it today?
Like actions. It's like it's not about what you're feeling, but it's like what's the next right action to obey and serve him as you know, as instructed by someone like you or like your rabbi or like reading. Because I can't rely on the Torah alone. It's not enough for me. Like I can't understand it. I need uh, a, um,
Right, but
someone to help.
why
Yeah.
why why are you choosing to obey the commandments in the Torah? In other words, you're
Because
right, action can help, but why are you even choosing to make those actions?
a decision that I make that when I walk with him, I feel better and
Right, so
am carrying
obviously
out my
you have
purpose.
correct. So obviously you've made some decision at some point that you are accepting God as your God, right? Which is why you're choosing to follow what he's asking you. So my question is, if I want to enhance this feeling that I have of accepting God as my king, of accepting to fulfill his will, how would I enhance that feeling? The feeling leads to action, of course. Question is, how do I
Surround
enhance?
yourself by people who have what you want.
Mm-hmm. It'll definitely help. Definitely help. I'm trying to see if anybody remembers. We discussed in the Tanya many times. What is the key to feelings? Anybody read my email this week? I wrote it in my email, by the way. Anybody here ever experienced loss, pain, right? I sat Shiva recently. You find that feelings of pain and sadness, they come in waves, and typically they're triggered by something. Typically, you're thinking about something that leads to that feeling. You don't just have the feeling and just come up and sobbing. The feeling is usually precipitated by some form of thought. Either you saw something that reminded you of your loved one. There's something that triggered a thought process that then leads to the feeling. And that's the same thing here. Is the Tanya talks about ultimately the key to feelings is the mind. And that's why we have redirection, right? But the key to the feelings is the mind. And therefore, if we want to accept upon ourselves God as king, as step number one, again, you can serve God through many different avenues. But if we accept, as the Alter Rebbe tells us, that the basis of serving God is accepting him as a king, accepting the yoke of heaven, as he calls it, then we need to contemplate and think about things that bring us to such feelings. I just want to say something interesting as well, is that anybody who knows Hasidim and knows Hasidic philosophy would be really surprised that the Alter Rebbe is really taking this path, that accepting the yoke of heaven is the most important thing. Because everyone knows Hasidim are happy and we're into loving Hashem. But it's very interesting that despite Chabad Hasidism focused on the joy and the happiness, we understand that if there's no basis of accepting God as king, if you don't take that upon yourself, then you're going to run into troubled waters. You're going to run into troubled waters. The basis of all service of God requires a full acceptance, or sorry, I shouldn't say full, I mean, like, ideally full acceptance, but an acceptance of God as our King. And that will sustain you even in the times when you're not inspired. That's why it's the basis. And it will also, once you have that, you will try to work on your other feelings towards God. But if your basis is love, well, when love is not there, then you have nothing, right? And love really does wax and wane. It comes and it goes. And that's why, just example, in marriages in America, many of them are based on love. And if they're based on love and not commitment, then, well, that's why you run into three, four, five marriages. Okay. Not always. There's other things that can come up as well. I'm not minimizing anybody who's been married more than once, but this is some of the issues, not all of it. Okay. I'm not making any sweeping statements here. Okay. But it's definitely some of the issues. And the whole Hollywood is driven at this idea that marriage is all about love, right? They sell stories and make movies all about romance. But the whole idea being, as long as you love each other, all the issues go away, and that's how they sell. That's how they convince people. And the Alter Rebbe is telling us here, and it applies to marriage, but obviously it applies in our relationship with God, is the basis of the relationship with God has to be, the basis of everything has to be accepting the yoke of heaven. And this is also, I just want to say, another important thing. I find many people who really love God, and I really don't question it. They really love God. But there are times where they'll say things like, well, I know God wouldn't want this, or I know God would want this. And I think what there's a lack of is accepting the yoke of God. In other words, if my connection with God is based on my understanding of Him and my love of Him and what I enjoy about Him, then when there's something that I think, that may be written, maybe maybe we're taught in our teachings we shouldn't do, but I think God thinks it should be done, right? So then I will disregard what is written and I will go by my gut feeling because I am basing my relationship on love and I know what God would love. But if my relationship with God is based on accepting the yoke of heaven, even things that are uncomfortable, even things that don't seem to further my connection with God, I will go ahead and do them because I accept God fully as my king. I'll give you an example. We discussed why was Abraham, what was so special about Abraham willing to sacrifice his son? Unfortunately, many Jews throughout the ages have had to sacrifice themselves, their children, whatever, for the sake of God. And the answer is that by Abraham it was different. By Abraham, if he would sacrifice Isaac, everything he had worked to build up would have been destroyed. No, as Isaac was the continuation of his legacy, and so like to him, if he would sacrifice Isaac and Isaac would indeed be killed, then everything he was working for to bring awareness of God into the world would end. He was getting older and there was no, continuation of it. And without Isaac leading it, it would all fizzle out, it would all disappear. And so that was really the test of God. God wanted to see if he would serve God even when it didn't make sense. And that's why God made him do it privately. Because if God made him sacrifice Isaac publicly, then you could make the argument, well, I'm publicly sanctifying God's name, and through this, other people will learn devotion to God. But no, God wanted him to do it privately, so nobody would ever know what he did. And that's really the test of faith, the test of faith, but it's more than faith. The test of how dedicated we are to God is whether we are willing to do things even when they don't fully make sense to us, because we have accepted God as our King, and whatever He asks of us is what we do. Yes, Nina.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that like it's not about feelings in a lot of a lot of times. Like it's more about commitment.
Yeah, you're right over here. It is interesting. Is he kind of is mixing here in the Tanya reverence and commitment. It seems to me, from my read of the Tanya, that yes, we want to develop our commitment into reverence, but the basis of the reverence is commitment. It's a form of reverence. It's a form of reverence. In other words, think of when a king walks into a room and you are standing there with uh, a complete lack of feeling of self and a complete giving yourself over to that king and be willing to doing whatever the king asks of you. Not because you are afraid of that king, because you love that king. Think of if Moses walked into the room. Okay, imagine the great Moses. Moses walked into the room, you'd be standing there willing to do anything that he would ask of you. Okay, you would stand there, very good, right? We have the giving of the Torah this week. So if Moses walks into the room, you would stand there with complete the Hebrew word is nullification. That's not the word I'm looking for. Complete humility, complete giving of yourself to Moses and be willing to do whatever he wants. It's a form of not it's a form of awe and reverence, okay? So it is commitment, but it is some form of feeling. It's like a feeling of lack of self almost. It's not a typical feeling that we describe, a feeling of commitment. So I get what you're saying. It's not a typical feeling as we describe it. But anyways, this is the basis of service of God. The basis of service of God. It's like the Jews at Mount Sinai, right? That we're gonna read in the Torah reading this week. The Jews at Mount Sinai, and hopefully you all join the daily Torah study. But the Jews at Mount Sinai, what did they say? They said, "Na'aseh v'nishma." We will do, then we will understand. In other words, they said, it's not important whether we understand. Yes, we want to understand later, but important is God, whatever you ask of us, we accept upon ourselves. That's what got them the Torah. They were able to get the Torah because they turned to God and said, we are giving ourselves over to you. We are willing to do whatever you ask of us. Now, did that commitment stay with them? Okay, maybe not so much. That's why we need to work on contemplation to continuously revive our feelings of giving ourselves over to God. But that is the basis of doing anything. Um, uh, uh, in any relationship and in a relationship with God. So we need to be able to contemplate things that will bring us to accept God as our King. So what type of things could we think about that would make us, um, what type of things could we think about that would make us be willing to accept God as our King, to accept the yoke of heaven as it's called? Any thoughts? In other words, it's easy to think of things that would make me love God. What would make me want to accept the yoke of heaven? Accept to do whatever God wants.
I think like changing our perspective, like we get lost in like a material world and all that's in it. And so like reminding ourselves of the truth every day and like trying to constantly look at him and like I can't always read the Torah, but I can like commit to this. So like committing to something like this once a week where I'm reminded every moment of the class, I'm reminded because if I'm not immersed in that, I lose it.
Very good. Very good. I'll expand on it. Any other thoughts? No. No.
Well, if
So,
you
yes.
focus, well, if you focus, on yourself, you behave in one manner. If you focus on the other, in this case, God, you behave in a different manner. So, if you could more outwardly focus your energy, um, then you're going to do what God wants because that's what's important to you.
Yeah, very good, very good. So both of you have been catching on to the idea, and the Tanya's been harping upon it. But of course, we walk through life and we're physical beings, and most of the time we're thinking about pizza and ice cream and chocolate cake, or I don't know, whatever. I'm just throwing out, or music, whatever else, right? If we want to be in a place where we feel reverence of God, we need to, so to speak, put ourselves in that room, right? I described a moment ago if Moses walks in the room. We need to be able to think in ways that like place us in a room, place us at Mount Sinai, place us in a place where we feel where in our mind's eye at the very least God's presence. And so what the Tanya is going to describe is we're going to need to have two meditations, and together they will put us in that room, which will give us that reverence and that feeling of we're standing before God and we want to do what He says. And so, step number one is reminding ourselves of how great God is versus how tiny we are, right? So, again, as long as we're thinking about ourselves, we're not going to be able too much, we're not going to be able to get ourselves into feeling God. So, we first need to remind ourselves for a moment how great God is, okay? So number one is to think about the greatness of God. But if we just think about the greatness of God alone, that alone is not going to work. Because one could make God so great that our actions and our lives don't matter. All right, so I thought about the greatness of God. Great, God is great. He's up there, he's busy. Right? There's Aristotle was famous for this. Aristotle, the famous philosopher, believed in God, but he also believed God was so great that he had nothing to do with us, so we could do whatever we want. It's nice to have. It's the best answer, right? The atheists always try to cut God out because if God exists, then they might have to make moral choices. Aristotle came with a brilliant, even better idea. He says, let's admit there's God. It answers the problem of intelligent design. It answers a lot of, scientific issues. Where did the world come from, right? So I'll believe there's a God, but this God is also so great. He doesn't bother with us. Okay, that was Aristotle's way of dealing with the problem. Brilliant, right? But obviously we don't believe in that. We don't. We believe that we believe that God cares about us, and God is so infinite that God has the ability to care about the details of our lives. And so these are the two meditations we need to have simultaneously. At one moment, the greatness of God, and at the same time, that God looks at us and cares about us and is waiting to see what we're going to do. So if you think about, the Moses walking into the room, as I said earlier, or the Rebbe walking into the room, but one of the things people would say a lot, I didn't meet Moses, but I met I met the Rebbe, but I don't remember. But one of the things that, well, I remember a little bit, but one of the things people would say about the Rebbe is the Rebbe would give you the feeling, despite his greatness, of that the only thing that mattered is you. You can hear that about other great people, but of course, hearing about the Rebbe, and that's really the idea, is that if someone just sees somebody that's great, it's like, wow, in their presence, you feel awed by their presence, but you're not necessarily accepting upon yourself to do what they want. But if you realize they care about you, then that greatness translates into, wow, I'll do whatever they want. And so that's the idea of it here, is we need to have a contemplation and to think in a way that we have to think in a way that um that yes, there's a greatness of God, and think at great length about how great God is, but thinking about the greatness of God alone without reminding ourselves of how much He cares about our actions will not bring to deed. And this just goes back to another thing we've discussed many times about my gripes sometimes with spirituality. Some spiritual movements focus on the greatness of God, but then they forget about how God cares about our day-to-day actions. And so therefore that's a spirituality that is not necessarily going to lead to action. because though you will feel spiritual at the moment, your actual day-to-day deeds don't matter that much. And so, you can think about God as a way to escape the mundane, but it won't really change necessarily how you act in your day-to-day life. So now we're ready to read the text inside. So to summarize what we've said, we have said that um, these next chapters we're going to describe the feelings that we are supposed to have at more length. We're going to describe what they are and why we need them and how to awaken them. So again, we're going to describe what they are, why we need them, and how we're going to awaken them. So we're going to start in this chapter with the reverence that is accepting the yoke of heaven, willing to do whatever God wants. So that is what it is. It's an awe that is accepting the yoke of heaven. Why it's important, we just explained, because it's the root of doing anything. And how do we awaken it? How do we reach it? Is through this meditation of, on the one hand, thinking about the greatness of God, and at the same time, thinking about how God cares about us specifically. All right. And so that's what he's going to start off. He's going to say, even though reverence is usually the source of negative commandments, it is actually the source of everything. So that's what he's going to start with. So he says, you need to remember always the beginning of worship, as well as its ongoing foundation and nourishing root, which is reverence, not love. So the Hebrew here is, the English didn't translate it well. He writes here, Reishis Ha'avodah, the beginning of worship, V'ikara, as well as its ongoing foundation, V'sharsha, and its root. Notice how he says all three of these. And that's because it really has everything. It is the first thing you need to have. At the very least, you need to be accepting God as your king. Then he says, it's not just the first step, it is the main step, ikara. Ikar means not only foundation, but it means it's the main thing. So the yoke of heaven is actually the main thing, okay? And sharshat, it's also the root of everything else that comes out from it. So all your great feelings of love towards God all come from it. And again, going back to a marriage starts with commitment. All the great feelings of love, not wanting to disappoint, all come out from the commitment, not the other way around. Okay? Reverence is the basic feeling upon which your relationship with God should be founded. You will never graduate from the need for reverence. Even as your worship matures, it will always remain with you, just as a root nourishes a tree. Love, as we shall see later, is of extreme importance in worship, but it is, so to speak, the building and not the foundation. And now he continues, because even though we learned above, chapter 4, that reverence is the root which motivates a person not to transgress any prohibitions, to turn away from evil, and love motivates the observance of the positive commandments to do good, which implies that neither reverence nor love is the root of all the mitzvahs. Nevertheless, as we shall see, it is actually reverence that forms the basis of all worship, and love merely energizes the positive commandments, but it's not their foundations. And as I gave all the examples of marriage as well. It is not sufficient to awaken love alone to do good. And before awakening love, you first need to awaken, if not a profound reverence resulting from inner meditative work, then at least the innate reverence found dormant in the heart of all Israel. So this is going back towards our discussions in previous chapters. There's different ways to awaken reverence, either through deep meditation or through a more simple meditation, which just taps into our natural reverence. And what is the basic reverence? Not to act insubordinately towards the King of Kings, the Blessed Holy One, as mentioned above. Reverence will not motivate you to worship God when he desires it. Reverence will motivate you to worship God when he desires it, and not just when you feel like it. If you're attached to your own self-importance, you reveal that all you worship is really self-service. It's just another type of pleasure that you do to gratify yourself, would be to serving God out of self-importance. Okay? So, so this reverence of God, he explains, he says you need to awaken this innate reverence so that it should be manifestly openly in your heart. It needs to be manifest in your heart. Or if you can't do that, at least awaken some reverence to focusing your mind, which is under your control, to think as you will. So this goes back to previous chapters as well. Whenever we discuss feelings, we said feelings are not possible to promise they will happen. So he said, you need to meditate. And if the feelings come, that's amazing and that's the best. But if they don't come, at the very least, it's in your mind. As he says, feelings for the invisible God should ideally be palpable in the heart, just as you would feel for something that you see with your eyes. But if you can't manage that, it's okay. As long as you can muster some sense of reverence in your mind, you can worship God. And the way to do this is by reflecting on the greatness of the Blessed Infinite One, even if not with intense focus of your mind, then in your general thoughts at least. Um, and now he says, now he's going to get to, so what is the actual meditation? And let me go to the next page, and we're gonna get into. He's gonna complicate it. Anyways, so we're gonna go not so complicated. Um, let's go here. So again, so what is the meditation, right? The meditation is to contemplate on the greatness of God, okay? And continuously, he continues, and to think of one, his supreme power, which rules over all the worlds, upper and lower. So now he's giving you details. Okay, God is great. Not only is God great, God is a ruler. Your reverence of any authority will be proportionate to that authority's power. God's power is supreme, ruling over the entire universe. In other words, you can have someone who's great but has no power. So your reverence may be limited. So not only is God great, but God has immense power as he rules over everything. But then he continues. But thinking how God has power over the world is not enough. You also need to meditate upon God's presence in the world and contemplate how, too, all existence is saturated with God who fills all the worlds, and how all existence is engulfed in God who transcends all the worlds. As the verse states, do I not fill the heaven and the earth? So this goes back to discussions we had other times. There's different godly energies. There's God's energy that's more tailored for the world. Then there's God's more encompassing light. It's like the difference between our general soul that gives us life and then the detailed powers of our soul that vivify different parts of our body, like the ability to see, the ability to hear, the ability to move a hand. So similarly, God fills our world in the two different ways. But the point is, God is great. Not only is he great, he's a ruler. Not only is God a ruler, God fills up the entire world both in an encompassing manner and in a detailed manner. Because you can have, just to give an example, you can have a CEO who fills the room with his presence. He fills the company. His vision fills everything, but the details are not his thing. Okay, so he's not involved in the details. God, his energy, is not only in a general way, which is great and important, but also in a more detailed way. Okay. Um, just want to point out here, he brings in the commentary here. Uh, he just mentioned here in the earlier commentary. Um, I just wanted to show you, as I said, the Rebbe said everyone should study chapter 41. So he writes here, the Yetzer Hara is never lazy and is very busy and industrious in his efforts to distract the Jew from his service of God. Therefore, you must have a ready weapon with which to combat him. For this reason, I suggest that you should study well and learn by heart the beginning of chapter 41 until those sacred words are engraved upon your mind and memory, so that you will always be able to recall them and think about them whenever the need arises to overcome a temptation. So the Rebbe says this chapter, which really describes the basis of all our service of God, is a basic reverence of God. If we just know the beginning of this chapter and we carry it around with us, then anytime we're faced with temptation, we can just read this chapter and be reminded of our basic reverence of God through the quick meditation that's mentioned here, and then we can bring ourselves back to serving God. I just want to point out, on other occasions, this meditation has been recommended to help with anxiety, depression, laziness, negative thinking, anger, and pride, and bad character traits in general. So this is a very powerful chapter because, again, the belief is that reverence is the basis of everything, and so this chapter gives us the easy, quick key to reach to reverence. All right. So again, what have we described so far? How are we reaching the meditation of the reverence of God? We understand that God is great. But not only God is great, God rules over all the worlds. Not only does God rule over the worlds, God energies present within the worlds, both in an encompassing manner and in a detailed manner. And now he's going to continue. Not only is God present in the world in a general manner, detailed manner, but also contemplate how God has disregarded the worship of the upper and lower spiritual worlds, and in giving the Torah to us, he has specified his desire to be worshipped as king by his people Israel. So now you're thinking even more. Not only is God ruling the worlds, not only is God present in the world, but God cares most about our service of God in this earth. And then he continues. But you might think to yourself, there's many members of the covenant, right? Why is my contribution so important? Therefore, the Tanya adds, that is, generally speaking, you have a unique relationship with God due to his covenant with Israel. But your relationship is even more personal than that, since God has indicated his desire to be worshipped by you in particular. Since a person must say, the world was created for my sake, Mishnah Sanhedrin. So that is like, wow. That is a powerful, powerful statement. So what the Rebbe is saying here, Alter Rebbe is saying here, is that you have to think to yourself, every single day you get up, think about how great God is. Wow, God is powerful. God is mighty. And God rules everything. He controls everything. That's not enough. God is everywhere, and God is present everywhere in a very general manner and a detailed manner. And then you tell yourself, but despite all God's greatness, God being everywhere, God cares about his relationship with the Jewish people. And even more specifically, God cares about his relationship with me. If someone's not Jewish as well, God cares about his relationship with you through the Torah as well. But that's the point, is that you have to recognize that God has if God created you, we spoke about this in the Kabbalah meaning course, which I suggest everyone should listen to the recordings. But in the Kabbalah meaning course, we said if we believe that God is intentional, then that means that if God created you, that means he created you with intention. And every detail of your life is also created with intention, right? There are some people that do things mindlessly. Human beings maybe do things mindlessly. God doesn't do anything mindlessly, okay? So if you exist, then that means that God cares about you specifically. And the Torah tells us God cares about your worship of him specifically, okay? And so this is a powerful meditation to accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven. When you recognize there is someone who's so great, yet cares about me so detailed and values what I can bring to the table, values my relationship, values my connection with him, I'm going to do whatever he wants, even if I don't understand it. I mean, this great God cares about me, uh, you know, uh, lighting Shabbat candles. This great God cares about me hearing Megillah not once, twice. This great God cares about me lighting the menorah. This great God cares about me studying Torah for 5 extra minutes. Why would I skip up that opportunity? I'm accepting upon myself to do whatever this great God that cares about me. I'm going to accept to do whatever it is that he asks of me. Or let's say you're faced with temptation. You're faced with temptation, and you really, really want to go ahead and do it. And then you read this chapter, and you remind yourself, 1 second, there's this incredible God who rules over everything, who's creating this temptation itself. And he cares about, very specifically, the relationship he has with me. How can I go ahead and do this? Against the God that's creating this, how can I go ahead and do this and act this way when he cares about me so much? Okay? And so that's why he continues here. And he says, once you come to this realization that God cares about you so much, he continues, and you in turn accept upon yourself God's sovereign authority, that he is to be king over you. The awareness of God's special interest in you ought to be reciprocated. He thinks you're special. He's chosen you as an instrument of his deepest will, and that will make you want to mirror that energy. And don't think that your response to him is insignificant. Don't say to yourself, what could my finite worship mean to an infinite God? Because God is described here as a king, to indicate that your worship matters to him. In contrast to a dictator who imposes his will on others, whether they like it or not, the appointment of a king depends on public's acceptance. There's no king without a people. Okay, so again, God is not a dictator. Dictators don't care what the people think. God is a king. Kings do want to be connected to their subjects. Maybe we're tainted with kings that we've seen, but God does care about his subjects. 1 second. For the people to be in relationship with the king and be bound by his rulings, they must first crown him and accept him as their teacher. 1 second. 1 second. All right. So, and he continues. So as strange as it may sound, God wouldn't be a king without you. He would be a dictator, but not a king, something which requires your acceptance. That's why, by the way, Rosh Hashanah is so important. On Rosh Hashanah, we accept God as king. Sure, God doesn't need us to rule the world, but if God wants to be a king, we need to accept him as a king. And again, our perception of king is so messed up because of many of the kings that existed throughout the ages that were dictators. But in Hebrew, it's actually different words. There's different words for a ruler and a king. And why are there different words? Because a king is not a ruler. A king is much more than a ruler. A king is someone who is very much connected to his subjects. That's what King David was. King David was dedicated to his people. King Solomon was dedicated to his people. Were all the kings dedicated to their people? Not necessarily. Some of them were more dictators, okay? But that's really, by the way, even some of the wicked kings, as we study in Nach, even Achav, who was into idolatry and into himself, to a certain extent, he was dedicated to his people. As you read the stories there was a certain element of dedication to his people. And so, if even such a king had dedication, that's really what a king is about. The king is connected to his subjects. And so, God wants to be a king. In order for God to be a king, we need to accept him. And so God has disregarded the entire. So now let's go back inside. That was just a little bit of a side point why Rosh Hashanah is so important, accepting God as king. And since, as we learned above, he disregarded the rest of the universe and has specified his desire to be worshipped as king, by you in particular, it follows that the entire universe only exists for the sake of your worship. So when you accept upon yourself God's sovereign authority, that he is to be your king over you, you make the whole universe worthwhile. That's a powerful thought. And what does it mean to accept God's authority? It means accepting God's authority means to worship him and carry out his will with all the different types of service required from a servant. Meaning, if you're a servant, you will do whatever God asks of you, right? So if there's a king, if the king asks you to clean a toilet or do the bookkeeping or send out a message to the entire congregation, it doesn't matter. You come to realize the reason why you're here is for something much bigger than your personal fulfillment and happiness. It's even bigger than your relationships, your career, your hopes, your wishes. Why were you put on this earth? You were born because God wanted you to fulfill his intent. So you choose to express your relationship with God not only in your heart, but in every aspect of your life through worshiping him and carrying out his will. So you're here to fulfill his intent. And before we get to the next line, I just want to say that this meditation is a very powerful meditation. He's going to continue along on this lines. And the next line that we're going to read is actually so important that the Rebbe actually at one point made 12 different verses every single person, at least every child should say every single day, because they are the basics of our faith. At every rally the Rebbe had for children, these 12 psukim, these 12 sections of Judaism, six from the written Torah, six from the oral Torah were put in there. And one of those 12 sections that was included is this one, because this next line is so foundational to your day-to-day life that it should be something that we need to remind ourselves of daily. So let us go ahead and read this. Let's read this line. All right. The final section of this meditation encourages you to contemplate God's vigilance over your actions and his innate awareness and concern with what you're doing. And here it goes. And look, God is standing over you, and all the earth is filled with his glory, and he is watching you. He's checking your inclinations and heart to see if you're worshiping him properly. This is the line kids say every single day. To remind ourselves every single day, and this is an important thing to remind ourselves every single day. Imagine God is right there, right in front of you right now, which he is. And though God is everywhere, he's right in front of you and he's looking at you, looking at your actions and looking at your heart to see if you are worshiping him to the best of your ability. That may make some people fearful, but I think if anything, it's powerful. It's like, wow, God is just watching me. That's incredible. I mean, I'm so lucky, because God is not a mean boss. God is my creator. He is my everything. And the conclusion of the 4 points of meditation, which was the first one was more general, the greatness of God. Okay, but we said that God is a ruler. God encompasses the worlds. God, now I have to remember myself, right? So we had God as the ruler, right? He controls everything. Then God fills all the worlds, right? That was number two. Number three was how he disregards the upper worlds and cares about you. And what was number four? And number four was and number four is we just had it here. Right. And number four is God's vigilance over your actions. So not only God cares about you, but he is looking at you and your actions. Okay. In detail. Okay. So now he says, therefore you ought to worship him with awe and reverence, and your awareness of his presence should be palpable and tangible, as if you were standing right in front of the king. You imagine that by letting go and accepting God's authority, you will be unhealthily denying. You might imagine that by letting go and accepting God's authority, you'll be unhealthily denying your needs, urges, and individuality. In reality, the opposite is true. Your sacred inner core, which subconsciously influences all your thoughts and interactions with others, desperately needs to surrender itself like a burning flame needs oxygen. Self-centeredness starves that flame, surrender fuels it. So by letting go, you don't deny yourself, you discover yourself. This isn't something that erodes your identity. To the contrary, this is your identity. In other words, the real you is a piece of God. And so the real you wants to surrender itself to God and always be connected to God. And so actually it allows us to express our true individuality. It allows us to express, oh, we are here for a mission. That's who I am. I'm here for a mission. That is my identity. And we often try to find things to soothe that and to ignore our mission and our identity. But they just make us frustrated because we never feel connected. Now it continues, and you should think deeply about all this at length, however much your mind and thoughts can grasp, according to your time constraints. Then he's going to continue when we should think about it. So we're going to run out of time. So he gave us the meditation, and what I want to do is I want to read this again in just straight translation, okay, without commentary, because now that I've explained to you the chapter, now I think you'll be able to see. Um, let's see, Tanya. Let's see. Wish I could take out the commentary. Let's see, text. Let's see, Tanya. English translation. Okay, so we want to go to. No, it's not going to work. Tanya in plain English. No. Okay, so I want to show you the chapter, and we're just going to read it straight in English because I feel like sometimes the power of a chapter gets lost when we read the commentary too much. We lose the point. So I want to just read straight what he just said here because it's something ideally one should read very often. And so we're just going to read together, okay? One must, however, constantly bear in mind what is the beginning of divine service as well as its core and root. This means, although fear is the root of turn away from evil and love is the root of do good, nevertheless, it is not sufficient to awaken the love alone to do good. But at the very least, one must first arouse the innate fear which lies hidden in the heart of every Jew, not to rebel against the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, as has been stated above, so that this fear should manifest itself in his heart or at the least in his mind. This means he should at least contemplate in his mind the greatness of the blessed, infinite light and his kingship, which extends to all the worlds both higher and lower, and he fills all the worlds and encompasses all the worlds. As it is written, do I not fill the heaven and earth? Yet, he leaves aside the creatures of the higher worlds and the creatures of the lower worlds. He uniquely bestows his kingship upon his people Israel in general, and upon him in particular, for a man is obligated to say, for my sake the world was created. And he, for his part, accepts his kingship upon himself, that he will be king over him, to serve him and to do his will, in all kinds of servitude work. And behold, God himself stands over him, and the whole world is full of his glory. And he scrutinizes him in particular, and searches his reins in his heart, to see if he is serving him as is fitting. And therefore he must serve in his presence with awe and fear, like one standing before a king. And that is the section that the Rebbe would say one should read from the Tanya every single day, ideally. And it's just a important morning reminder. God is in front of us. You know, the code of Jewish law talks about in the morning when we wake up to say Moda Ani. How do we jump out of bed? It says you must imagine God is like standing at the foot of your bed. Who would just, turn over in their bed knowing the king is there? And so God is waiting to see us serve him. And so how can we just lay there in bed and do nothing? We have to say Modani, wash our hands, get out of bed, be ready to serve Hashem. And so this is what this meditation is about every single day. It's a short meditation, and it's basically the basic point is to remind yourselves how great God is, but at the same time remind us of how God is literally cares deeply and personally about me and about you. And when you put those two things together, that awakens within you a desire to do what he wants. Because throughout the day, we have many distractions and things that come up, and we get very distracted. And the basis and the core of being a Jew is reminding ourselves of the greatness of God and that God cares about my personal actions and deeds. And I want to remind myself that God cares about my personal actions and deeds, then I am going to serve Him. I'm going to do what He asks of me, and I'm going to do the best of my ability. So that is the end of today's class. We will discuss more next week, and next week we will also get into more detailed meditations on specific mitzvahs, how that applies. But this was, of course, the class on the general meditation and the general thought process required to serve Hashem each and every single day, day in and day out. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Yes,